Today, we're getting under the hood of women's health with Beth, a PhD researcher, feminist, and a passionate member of the LGBTQ+ community. Her zealous commitment to equality, particularly regarding gender and sexuality, is demonstrated through her research and everyday interactions with the intent to disrupt traditional societal norms, improve the lived experience of marginalized groups, and educate others. Beth will get under the hood of first health screenings.
It was a discussion from a young age, essentially. We were very much aware of cervical cancer. So in year 8, so the age of 13 at schools, the cervical cancer jab was available, and therefore it was a discussion in and around women's health then from a very young age. I don't think we were fully in the know as to what was to come when we turned 25. But again, as we got older, there was discussions with family and friends and other women, I guess, in and around what's to come and what womanhood entails, whether that's starting your period and then obviously coming from that, papsmears, pregnancy, childbirth, all those types of things and conversations. I was really fortunate that my family and other people around me were very open to have those discussions. So it was something that I was aware of from a young age, but I think I wasn't fully aware of what exactly it entailed until I was older. And then obviously I'd looked into it myself and had further conversations around that. I guess negative, but not negative in the fact that it was a bad thing. Negative in the fact that it caused emotions as nervousness, anxiety. It was a big thing. It was a vulnerable thing. It required a moment between yourself and a medical professional where you were vulnerable. I think also there is stigma in and around kind of women's health and discussing those types of things. Smear tests weren't necessarily a topic either that were overly spoken about within sex education or education around kind of health and relationships. It wasn't anything that was overly brought to the front of these topics and conversations. So what I then did know was essentially horror stories and negative experiences that individuals have, or the emphasis of it being uncomfortable or not overly a nice experience to have, but one that was also very necessary. So from the very get-go, any discussions around that was very much focused on how important it was to have that, regardless of how kind of uncomfortable or unpleasant it was. I think that was kind of my anxiety and awareness around that from a very young age, that it wasn't something that was overly positive that you experienced. So far, I've only had the smear test. I haven't had anything else. I'm aware of obviously the breast scans, but they occur at a later age. So for now, that's literally the only women's screening test that I've had. So my first smear test was at the age of 26. So in the UK, you're required to have a smear test or encouraged to have a smear test at the age of 25. You get invited to do so. But I put it off. I actively chose to put it off. I think it was something that I was very nervous around. It was something that felt very scary. It was essentially the unknown. It was a big thing, and therefore I did continue to put it off until I was 26. It was something that I was very aware of, that was really important and very much pushed by my family, particularly around my mum having precancerous cells previously. So it was very much drilled into me, the importance of that. But regardless of that, my nervousness took over, and it was something that I kept saying, yeah, I'll do it, I'll book it. And then time would pass, and then I'd realise I hadn't. And I had a reminder from the doctors. I got called up to say, you've been invited to have this, you haven't come. It's time to book your smear test. So I did that. So that was last year. My experience was positive, but also complex. I think they're the words that I would essentially use to explain if I was talking to people. So from the very get-go, as I said, I was very nervous and anxious around having this experience. It was new to me. It was something that I hadn't experienced before. I had to go to a new surgery. It was with someone that I'd never met before. So I think I was very nervous from the get-go about what was going to happen, and very aware of the vulnerable position that I would be in, not only by having that smear test, but again, for being naked, showing a part of my body that I hadn't showed to a stranger before. And it was very intimate to me. So it was something that I was very aware of from the get-go, that was going to be something that I had to share in that moment. So I was really fortunate that I had a positive experience with the nurse that I had. I very much shared my concerns and anxieties in and around this experience, and had told her my friends' experiences and essentially horror stories. And she really made sure that these particular things that had happened to my friend hadn't happened to me. So we're very open with discussions around why I was scared, what I was most nervous about, and she very much emphasised that I was in control and I could make sure that things were stopping and starting as and when I suggested. I was very much in control of that, and she even essentially emphasised that I didn't have to go through with it. Obviously, she would advise that I do, but it was my decision, and I think that really put me at ease, because she understood. She was a woman, she would have had a smear test before, and I knew that. And I think that her approach was really caring and considerate. And I was very fortunate and grateful for that, because not many people have had kind of those types of experiences. And she also said it was a massive shame, because she would want everyone to have a really positive experience around that. So again, I was very aware from the kind of minute of having to take my clothes off, being kind of very naked and vulnerable in that, physically, but also, I guess, kind of my thoughts and feelings around that as well. I was, with a stranger who was going to see my body, and the kind of stigma and kind of taboo kind of topics in around what women's bodies are like or should be like. So my experience was complex in the fact that I have a tilted cervix, and I only found that out within my procedure itself. But that obviously causes complexities when actually undertaking the smear test itself. So I actually had to have different size and shape speculums used, multiple tries to do it, and unfortunately it was unsuccessful the first time, in which I had to go back, and that time was more successful. We managed to do it, and then obviously later got my results. But I think it was really important for me to understand what was going to happen and be comfortable to say stop, and acknowledge that I was in pain or in discomfort, and how I could make it better for myself. So for example, the second time I listened to music, I'd already taken painkillers beforehand. Even the first time I was aware of that. So just being aware of what I could do and what control I had in that moment, to make it more positive for myself. But yeah, I couldn't fault the nurse at all. She was an absolute brilliant person to have, and I felt really fortunate for that, because I was so nervous to go through this experience. It was something that I was very anxious about. There was a lot of anxiety, concerns, but also nervousness around kind of being vulnerable in that moment. I was also very aware, being non-heterosexual myself, a lot of people said, oh, this experience is fine if you've been sexually active, blah, blah, blah. I think it's really important that this caused like nervousness for myself, as I'd only been with women previously. I was fortunate in the fact that I am comfortable to discuss my sexuality, and was very transparent with the nurse. But I think for some individuals, this could be another source of anxiety. And also, I'm very aware that being heterosexual is kind of the dominant, is the narrative, is expected within society. And by kind of breaking that, being open, then obviously can be another concern for individuals. Unfortunately, happy to discuss that. But I know that obviously for these individuals, they may be another source of anxiety. It may be something that they are potentially embarrassed about. Not that there's anything to be embarrassed about, but it's kind of a new topic maybe for them. Or some people might be starting to understand themselves and their identity, and therefore not something they want to kind of bring to that. So it's additional complexities that kind of cross over for individuals that are part of the community. But I think across the board, it is an environment that is new if you haven't had it before. It's something that is essentially stigmatized and or perceived as a negative or kind of stressful thing to go through. So I think from the very get-go, I was very aware of that and kind of carried that in with me. And I did feel anxious and very vulnerable throughout the process, regardless of how comforting the nurse was. So I think that it's very normal to feel that way. But I think sometimes you have to kind of push through that for the kind of benefits you're going to gain from having the smear test. Being a sexual minority, being part of the LGBTQ plus community does have an impact. I think this goes across healthcare in general, and I will talk specifically on smear tests, but I think there's a lot of presumptions in around how people identify, and discussions that I had, particularly with women, for example, in and around contraception, questions kind of around that and birth control. I think it's really important that doctors and medical professionals are aware of the presumptions that they put in place when they ask these types of questions. I think women's healthcare in general, it does have an impact if you are part of the community because, for example, asexual individuals may not have been sexually active at all, or maybe not be interested in that, and obviously that can then obviously shape their experience of how they're experiencing a pap smear. Again, for individuals that are queer that may not have had sexual experiences with men, again, another kind of anxiety or discussion to kind of have with a nurse or a person in that place. I think also being part of the community and the expectations or conversations around kind of families as well, or wanting to have families. And I know obviously the kind of focus of this is in and around smear tests, but I think it's really important to be aware that sexual identities have an impact on women's healthcare overall, whether that's people wanting or not wanting to have families, kind of the discussions in and around kind of birth control and those types of really important conversations and presumptions that often happen within kind of women's healthcare. So I think it's really important that this is considered overall, as well as obviously specifically within pap smears. And I think the education and awareness for medical professionals, but also from individuals going into that, will hopefully provide an inclusive and transparent process. Book it as soon as you can. I think having that extended wait only allows you to build up more anxieties in and around what's going to come. I think that was one thing for me. If I'd got it booked and kind of knew it was coming and then had done it, it would have had less time to kind of build up nervousness in and around this and more anxieties and then putting it off and things like that. So firstly, I would advise everyone to get it booked in as soon as possible, especially because it is so important. I think very much be aware as to what is going to happen and what is required as part of the procedure, and also what you yourself and also the medical professional can do to make it less uncomfortable or less embarrassing or less stigmatized. I think I very much read up or watched videos or had discussions in and around that, and I think that's really, really key for individuals to be fully informed. There are bodies, this is something that we're going to experience, and I wanted to know exactly what was going to happen, as kind of gruesome as it may be or uncomfortable as it may be to kind of watch or hear about or see. I think it's really important to know exactly what's going on, because it is going to happen to your body, and it's nice to kind of know what's going on when you're experiencing that in a strange way. I think if there are any kind of hints and tips available online or that your friends or family can give, I think it's really important to potentially take them on board, but also see what fits for you. For example, it was suggested to take painkillers in advance as it may be uncomfortable. That's something that I did. I didn't necessarily feel that it had a particular impact on my experience, but again, there was no harm in that. I, on the second time, wore headphones and had music on. And for some people that may be good because it's a distraction, it's a focus upon that music and rather what's going to happen. But also being in tune with your body, again, as I mentioned, about, for example, having tilted cervix or being aware of kind of how your body works, and kind of the anxieties around that, and how obviously that then sometimes makes it a more uncomfortable experience. I think it's quite funny in the fact that you often get told to relax. In that moment, you're never really going to be relaxed. You know, you're there with your clothes off. going to have a speculum put inside you. Like, it's not something that is something that you're like, yes, I'm so excited for this, I can't wait to have this done. It's something you are going to be nervous and anxious about, and therefore, you know, you're not going to feel relaxed as much as they encourage you to do so. But I think it's about very much focusing on, for example, music or kind of conversations, or kind of really letting your body relax, because the more you do relax, the less uncomfortable it is, and the quicker it is done and over as well. So I think there's not really kind of one size fits all with regards to individuals' experiences, and your experience will be very individual to you. No bodies are the same. So I think that that's really important, and to kind of take forward some stories that you hear from individuals and what you see online, but also that isn't necessarily going to be what happens to you. So I think it's really good to have these conversations and awareness, but I think sometimes the sharing of horror stories can often put people off more. So I think it's kind of gauging the balance between the realities of things, but also pushing away from the kind of negative conversations in and around that, because essentially it just pushes people away from wanting to do something that's really, really important.